Can your team truly make great decisions under pressure? Welcome to Decisions That Count, the podcast where we dissect the science of decision making and show you how to optimize your cognitive function for peak performance. Today, we're diving deep into how empathetic leadership can transform your team's ability to make sound decisions even when the stakes are high.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shawn Watson. I'm going to be your host and hopefully your guide to mastering some of the art of decision making. As a neuroscientist and an entrepreneur, I've spent years researching decision fatigue and know firsthand how crucial it is to understanding our brain's limitation, especially in today's society. So from my own journey from academic research to building a successful business has taught me that decision making is not only valuable and essential, but it's something we need to be more conscious of.
And I'm Michelle O'Brien, co-host, mum, marketer, and marathon runner. And I'm here to bring the human element of the science, hopefully bridging the gap between the research and the real life application. I'm really passionate about helping people apply these insights to their everyday lives because it's starting to really transform mine.
And Michelle and I are thrilled for the guest that we have today. He understands the power of human connection in leadership. He's been a keynote speaker, a workshop facilitator, a space creator for humans. He's transformed countless organizations by redefining empathy as a skill, not just a feeling. He's an incredible energy, a fantastic look, and a track record of achievement that's nothing short of inspiring. So please welcome the empathy guy, Joseph Cope.
Thanks, Shawn and Michelle. I can't tell you how excited I am to start this conversation today.
Us too. I'm going to get straight in here with what's the definition, or how do we define empathy?
Empathy is commonly misunderstood because it gets thrown into the soup of feelings, emotions, the woo that's out there. And that's really, really scary for leaders who are in a space where accountability matters the most. And so when we have a bottom line that we have to meet, nobody has time for feelings and nobody has time for emotions. And so let's start by talking about what empathy isn't. Empathy is not sympathy. Empathy and sympathy are two totally different things. Now let's say this, they both have their sources in a similar place. Think about this. Humans are wired to connect. And because humans are wired to connect as a means of survival, every human has an empathetic nature within them. They have an empathic nature within them, which means that by the time that you have grown into an adult, some of us, our empathic nature has become the means of our survival, which is why we feel other people's emotions. That is why sometimes other people's emotions feel so heavy on us. What I want to tell you today, Michelle and Shawn, is the way that I'd like to redefine empathy is the skill that a leader possesses to create space for another human so that individual can choose change for themselves. You see, on the other side of that is if our empathic nature is not harnessed into a skill, our empathic nature begins to manifest as sympathy. And sympathy is, I feel so sorry for you. I'm feeling so much of what you are. What can we do to solve the problem? How can I help you? How can I carry your emotions with and for you? And I have some real talk for you. Nobody wants your sympathy. It doesn't last. It kicks in resentment. It kicks in long-lasting burdens for people. It causes people pleasing. It causes perfectionism. There's all these things that are related to sympathy, whether it's self-sympathy or sympathy for somebody else. So, Michelle, your question is, what is empathy? Empathy is a skill that we have to bring back into humanity to reintroduce connection into the world, authentic human connection that has boundaries that are grounded in the work that you do with yourself, by yourself, for the people who you care about the most.
This is so like eye-opening to me. And when we've had this conversation earlier as well, is that, I definitely have mistaken what I thought as empathy as definitely sympathy. And I think there maybe have been times where, like, leaders have said to me, okay, you need to be a little bit more empathetic in this situation. And I've kind of gone away and thought, well, I have, but actually what I've had is deep sympathy. But the leaders themselves have not necessarily been able to identify why my understanding of empathy wasn't working. And I suppose there was a little bit of a disconnect there. And I think because that definition of what, that's not commonly used. People throw around the word empathy, but there are different interpretations of it.
What you could have said, if you could have gone back in time, is you could have said, I'm really sorry, my empathic nature just kicked in, and I need the skill to be able to create space. I'm working on that.
But no one's ever told us it was a skill.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I think it's almost, being empathetic or having empathy almost feels like a value sometimes, or a trait, rather than a skill.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And think about this. The definition in the dictionary of empathy is the ability to feel someone's emotions alongside with them, or feel someone else's feelings and emotions. It's the ability. And ability, that's not bad. Ability is just not deep enough. Where does your ability come from? The thing is, humans have lost the ability to, or they've misinterpreted the ability to. We have to reintroduce it as a skill with intention.
Yeah, I agree with Michelle. What's so interesting to me is that it's a skill. I think that's fascinating because there's so many leadership books and talks and whatnot, and quite often you see empathy listed, but it's listed among other things that are more obvious to me, like integrity or something like that, when you know intrinsically what it is. Whereas empathy, I always thought was something that was like immutable, right? Or I thought it was something that you had to experience what they have experienced in order to have an authentic, empathetic nature. So you need to have gone through it yourself. But from what you're just saying, which is wonderful, it means that it's something that we can all improve on.
What we could take from a lot of this is that none of those things that you said, Shawn, are wrong. None of them are wrong, because it's easier to empathize with somebody when you've gone through something that they've gone through, clearly. But just because you empathize with somebody doesn't mean that it's not going to come across as sympathy unless you do it with intention. And the intention is what we're trying to get at with empathy as a skill. Think about if you're an athlete that is trying to get better, you don't just go out and become somebody who's an amazing professional, let's say basketball player, just by watching YouTube videos, right? You don't hope that you can do it. And you might think that you're really good because you can dribble a basketball in your driveway. But you step on the court, you have to know exactly where to be, what the timing of the game is, how much time there is left on the clock. You have to remember all those drills that you went through before the season, going from one cone to another, the practice that it took, the muscle memory that it took to get to that place. It's the same thing when you can implement empathy with intention.
No, super cool. Well, Joseph, on this podcast, what we tried to tackle is a condition that's our parents never really probably needed to worry about, and that's decision fatigue. Well, maybe Joseph, actually, I'm going to ask you: have you heard of decision fatigue, and what do you think it is?
The first time that I heard the term decision fatigue was when Michelle and I first had an introduction a number of weeks ago, and the only time that I've heard the term fatigue used as an add-on in a hyphenated word is compassion fatigue, which is one of the pieces that I talk about. But when I heard decision fatigue, it really got me thinking. So based on my understanding, Shawn, correct me if I'm wrong, we used to have to not make a lot of decisions, and now we have to make a lot of decisions, and our brain is just tired.
Yeah, you basically summed it up. There's what we're learning is there's just a hard limit to the number of decisions our brain can make before our brain starts to adapt to the situation and take shortcuts, essentially. And that's what we call this decision fatigue. And it's just from the sheer number of decisions that are made. So decades ago, people were making hundreds. Now we're thought to make, in the tens of thousands of decisions a day. So the number of decisions that humans are making is increasing. But the landscape that you're making the decisions under also has an effect. So if you're very emotional, or it's a very stressful situation that you're in, decision fatigue can happen much quicker. Yeah, so it is, you got it right. It's just there's a limit to the number of quality decisions that our brain can make. And what's interesting to me is decision fatigue. Usually, once I explain the consequences to people, they start to recognize it more in their own life, because they realize it's not mental fatigue. It's not feeling tired. It's not like you need a cup of coffee. There's just a cloud in your brain. There's a fogginess that is not, things aren't working as well as they should. So the consequences of decision fatigue are broadly speaking twofold. So one, and I really want to know what you see in leadership when I explain the consequences to you. So the first consequence is what we call decision avoidance. This is basically when your brain says, you know what, I've made too many decisions today or this morning, I'm just not going to make any more. So that's leaving an email in your inbox because if you open it, you're going to have to make a decision, right? That's scrolling endlessly through Netflix because you just can't make a decision. The second consequence is a bit more sinister, and this is the one I'm going to deep dive with you on, hopefully, is what we call default decision making. So this is when your brain, when it's forced to make so many decisions, it'll actually default to heuristics or network patterns that it's most comfortable with, or decisions it's used before. But quite often those default decisions aren't appropriate to the situation at hand, because you're not taking all the different aspects and variables in play. You're just actually defaulting to what's worked in the past. So knowing those definitions, actually, if I take it back to even maybe empathy and teaching the skill set, in some of the leaders you work with, have you seen decision fatigue, and does it affect empathy? Do you see changes in how they kind of deal or use this skill when they're suffering from this condition, and how maybe can you mitigate it?
Well, Shawn, my background as the empathy guy is actually not in business. My background is in education. And leaders in education are teachers. And teachers are going through the ringer right now when it comes to having to make decisions, because educators are under so much stress to produce results with their students. Test scores matter so much right now. And in some places in the world, teachers' paychecks are directly correlated to student test scores. Bonuses are directly correlated to student test scores. So now you can imagine the amount of stress that is going on. And 100 years ago, when teachers had to teach, all they had to worry about was, can little Shawn add 2 plus 2, 2 plus 3, and 2 plus 5? Because he needs to know how many sheep and how many horses there are, and how many grains of bushel go into a bushel. Like, it was so relevant to your present day that you didn't have to make a lot of decisions. I remember being a middle school teacher. I taught 14-year-olds, 13 and 14-year-olds. And I remember being under so much stress at one of my particular schools, because we had been on what was called the improvement required list for 9 years. In the state where I live, you're only supposed to be on it for 5. But because we were the only school on the other side of town, and I say that with intention, think about the stress that comes with living on the other side of town and everything that's with that, right? Year 9, they couldn't shut us down. So by the time that I got to that year, they had brought in all the consultants, they brought in all the trainers, they brought in all of the schematics, they brought all the frameworks, and they told us exactly how to do our jobs, and it made it like this. And then they extended our day, gave us one more 90-minute period to teach, and they expected us to make sure that we were our best all day long. And so there were days, Shawn, where I remember driving to school and thinking to myself, I wonder how much that semi-truck driver makes. And I wonder how many podcasts I could listen to if I was doing that job, right? Like, it just, you're like, and I'm not even talking, at that point, I'm not even talking about making decisions. Like, at that point, my decision is, am I going to continue driving to work, Or am I going to take the on-ramp and drive north until I run out of gas? Like, at that point, decisions become about survival. So it's no wonder avoidance is the first thing. That's where we're getting to, is when survival is at stake, the first thing that we try to do is avoid. That's just the very first thing that we try to do, is we try to avoid. No one wants to go into fight right away. Like, nobody's default is fight. Babies don't fight right away, right? Babies go to sleep. Their bodies shut down. Younger kids, they ball up, they turn away. But those fight, flight, or freeze responses, the flight response is typically the first one because we're scared. And so we move away from what's scaring us, even if it's just having to make a decision. Even if it's just that, gosh, it makes such a big impact on the people that you're working with and for. So maybe even to get to this point, some of the best leaders that I had in that space were the people who recognized what was going on. And I'll tell you this, I had one assistant principal who I worked for. He realized that I was under a lot of stress. And one of the things that I didn't do because I was under stress was something that I was supposed to do, which was write lesson plans. I hated writing lesson plans because I knew everything that I was going to teach my kids. And to me, why did I have to put it down on paper when I knew what was going to happen, right? It didn't make sense to me. If my kids' scores are still doing okay, why do I have to prove to you that I'm doing the right thing? So he came into my classroom for about 3 weeks and he just observed. All he did was observe. And he just took pieces of this and took pieces of that. He just observed. And so, and he always would leave you a note like, hey, love the way that you had that kid participate. Thanks for doing this with this kid. I'm so glad that you're working with this group of students. They really need you. The way that you presented that today was fantastic. He did nothing but let me know that he was there for the right reason. And then 3 weeks after that, he pulls me into his office and he goes, hey, listen, I just need to let you know, I love what you're doing in class. You have those kids eating out of the palm of your hand. But I want you to get better. I know you want to get better, and I can't give you feedback on nothing. So when I come into the next time, I just need to know where you are in your lesson so that I don't have to wonder where you are, and so that my feedback to you can be so much more specific, because you're great, you just can get better. Let's go from great to excellent. And wouldn't you believe it? Like, lesson plans to me, they were just bullet points. They were just something that he could see. It made sense. But it made, my point in the decision piece is, it made the decision to have to write lesson plans, like I didn't have to think about it anymore. Because now I wasn't trying to live up to somebody else's standard. It wasn't stressful. It was something where somebody had created the space, that space of empathy with intention, to give my decision-making capacity a higher standard.
Like, I love this. I love that he just recognized, and I think what he maybe didn't consciously know is that you were suffering from decision fatigue and probably physical and mental fatigue all at the same time. Like, this, it was intense. But because he was tuned in, he was able to see and was able to find like the right solution that was going to give him what he needed, but relieve you. And if he hadn't had that empathy, it could have actually been a completely different situation, right?
I've worked for people who didn't have the skill of empathy. And it was coming at you. This is how we do it. This is what you need to do. Check these boxes off. The state's watching over us. Make sure that you need to don't do that. And the moment that all of those things come in, my amygdala has just kicked off and I'm high emotion. I'm in survival mode. And now, even if I wanted to do a good job, my brain is in survival mode and I'm just not even at a place where I want to do it, let alone choose to. I don't even want to think about doing it.
And just what's wild is like that high stress environment is going to make that decision fatigue worse. You know, Shawn, you can kind of build on the science behind it, but my understanding is that the stressful the environment, the worse, the faster the decision fatigue kicks in and the worse that it can get.
No, it is. I mean, this is why we're talking to like some big organizations because we have quite a lot backwards, I suppose. And theoretically, we know like as a leader, you want to enable your employees, of course. But in the context of decision fatigue, is you want to make sure that they're making the best decisions they can for as long as they can. So from your story too, Joseph, it sounds like what that leader was doing actually was just building that space, as you call it, to make sure that you were in the best state that you could to make the decisions that were appropriate and correct. Because stress is definitely a disabler, right? It causes decision fatigue to happen very quickly. So in extreme circumstances, you're talking within 30, 45 minutes, it can happen. There's a clinical study with people in the finance industry, and by late morning, they're suffering from decision fatigue. And actually, in that case, it was with loan applications. And their default decision was to reject loan applications just because it was a safer thing, right? So yeah, absolutely, Michelle. The stress and that fabric that you're making these decisions under. And Joseph, what you described in the situation, I guess what your work is all about too, is making this space for them to, one, that it sounded like he kind of removed a lot of the mundane decisions. So he tried to help you to focus on what was most important, and then giving you space to trust your decision making. He trusted your decisions. That was very obvious from your story. He didn't tell you what your decisions should be. He just tried to build the space for you to do it yourself.
And I'm so glad that you said that do it yourself thing, because decisions get made with intention when they matter to you. If a decision is made on someone else's behalf, that decision is not going to be made from a place of authenticity. There are books out there. One of my favorite books out there is written by Daniel Pink called Drive, written about 10 years ago. And in it, he talks about what is the secret to motivation within human beings. And the number one variable that determines whether or not a behavior is going to change and stick in the long run is what he calls autonomy. So if a leader can create that space so that that individual can choose change for themselves, you're calling it decision, I'm calling it change. They're the same thing. They're what we're talking about, right? Like, empathy is the skill that a leader possesses to create space for another human so that individual can see the value of change for themselves. You're going at an even more micro level where I'm calling it change like universal. You're saying can make a specific decision in the moment that matters to them.
No, you're right. It's a similar line of thought for sure. I guess it's just more broad. From the empathy standpoint, I guess what's really interesting to me too. So if we think of decision fatigue as defaulting to the safest decision, and if we can teach empathy, because my question is more aligned like, well, how do we get our leaders in situations of stress and anxiety when they're stressed out? When you're vice principal, what if he is not in the right state? Can we train him or can we train ourselves as well to default to show and have that empathy, even if we ourselves are suffering?
So let's answer this in two parts, because the last thing you said is even if we ourselves are suffering. The reality around empathy is this: your capacity to create space for others is limited only by your capacity to create space for yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup. So when leaders start to feel that sense of burnout, stress, anxiety within them, and they're suffering from the simple decision fatigue of how am I going to treat this employee? When they're not aware in that moment, listen, that brown stuff trickles downhill. And before you know it, everything stinks. So number one is leaders have to become so aware. I mean, listen, leaders are paid for results. Leaders are not paid to love on their employees, but leaders do have the responsibility to make sure that their employees are in the best place to produce the best results. And that means if anyone's going to be aware, leaders have to be aware. So to your point, Shawn, Can we train leaders? Absolutely. But leaders have to be in the right space so that they're willing to be trained, so that their default becomes, wait, I'm thinking this, that's a red flag. And you might even, listen, some of my best leaders have said this to me. I'm not at my best right now. I want to make sure I'm best for you. Can we address this tomorrow? How powerful is that as a leader? When I did that with my 7th grade students, they would come at me hard because they were having a hard day. And if I mirrored those emotions back to them, boy, I lost them for a month because now it was personal. But in the moments that I had the awareness and eventually the skill to recognize, even though some 14-year-old kid is cussing me out, I'm still looking at them and going, boy, it is not our best day today. I want to make sure I'm at my best. I'm going to go take care of a couple of kids. I've got to take care of attendance. Let's give it a little bit. I'm going to come back to you. Let's see if we can do this. We've done this before. Can we get through this? But you can see, even in that power of pause to step out of those high emotions, the leader is setting themselves up by sometimes literally creating physical space to potentially create space for somebody else. And that is not the default for human beings, because we are always on the edge of survival. And then you throw stress in there, and now it's a vortex of survival. And sometimes leaders feel like they're clawing their way out of the vortex just to take care of themselves. And the next thing you know, they're sucked in and they're acting like 14-year-old boys too.
Oh, there's so much in here. And I think I'm all kind of, every time I speak to you, Joseph, I kind of have these epiphanies, where I'm like, oh yeah. But I think, yeah, often, and I've definitely had this, my last corporate role working in kind of marketing for a big entertainment company, you're so intense, and it's so intense. I was looking after 7 countries, and we had all these product launches, and I was managing agencies and teams, and it was like over 100 people, and it was a lot, and I didn't have a lot of empathy for myself, I think, and maybe because of that, honestly, I was just in survival mode most of the time. I was just trying to get through the sheer volume. And what's interesting is it isn't necessarily the volume of work, it's the volume of decisions that I had to make every single day. The team were producing 30,000 social media posts a year that were kind of running through my team. And so, that you can kind of imagine, that every single post had to be approved by legal and by all the different studios, Marvel, Pixar, National Geographic, everything had to kind of have all these layers of approval, complexity with different markets, what we can and can't say in different markets, brand guideline, so. And then, obviously all of these different people coming to you with different problems throughout the day. And, I didn't always have empathy because I was just so having to deal with the sheer volume of decisions a day that I was having to deal with. And I didn't know anything about decision fatigue at this point. I didn't know that's what I was suffering from. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm kind of just rambling a little bit about it, but it just kind of gives some kind of real life context as to what you're talking about, is that often leaders are the ones that everybody is looking to make the decisions, and they are paid to make decisions. And the more senior you get, the more difficult those decisions get.
So this might not be a bad time for me to tell you how much I hate the word framework. Let me tell you why. I cannot stand the word framework, because the word framework means that it's somebody else's idea that you have to implement. So if the framework doesn't make sense to you, now I have to choose to make a decision to whether or not I'm going to follow the framework, right? And until the framework makes sense to you, it doesn't make sense. I'm bringing up this because, Shawn, you asked earlier, how can we do this with intention so that it's the default? How does it become the default for leaders? Because the reality is the leaders have to take care of themselves. But then what? Because, Michelle, if all the leaders do is take care of themselves, then they may be tuning into their empathic nature. But then what? Because if they take care of themselves and they see that they need help and that I've got holes in my soul, there is this theory of projection where what we're experiencing, we project onto others. I have a hole in my soul. Oh, I remember all those childhood things that happened to me. And now we start going, oh, Michelle, you're having a hard time making that decision. Did you and your dad have a really rough relationship too? And then all of a sudden it just goes whoosh, and the fire, like, and could you see where the empathic nature just turned into sympathy, and it just spiraled out of control? There is a right time and a right place. So this is where I've been able to put this framework of empathy into something that we can practice. It's only a framework until it becomes yours, okay? And the moment that it becomes yours, throw the framework out and just call it empathy with intention. But you have to have benchmarks in empathy with intention. So how can leaders practice it? And how can leaders bring a culture of empathy into where they're working? Let's start by talking about, let's shift the climate before we change the culture. A climate is shifted with one conversation at a time. Climate shifts just in those micro fractional moments. And so the framework that I coach empathy and I speak about empathy is called the cargo framework. Empathy with intention is the name of the framework. The model is the cargo model. The C stands for connection. The A stands for accountability. The R stands for resistance. The G stands for gain. And the O stands for outlook. Quickly, what it is: connection. A leader can ask himself, what am I doing to connect with this human right now? That's it. Is my tone? Is it my body language? Is it that I need to just take a breath and slow my speech down? What am I going to do to just connect? 2 is accountability. Accountability is I am holding myself accountable to my values. You remember all that work that you did to create space for yourself? I hope within that space that you created for yourself, you determined the values by which you are living your life. And in this challenging moment, you're going to hold yourself accountable to those values. My personal values: compassion, courage, curiosity, health in body and mind. Those are my 4 pillars of life. So every time there's a challenging moment, I have to ask myself, is now the time for courage? What does that look like? Do I have to engage in maybe courageous curiosity right now and ask myself, is there something more? Is there something that I'm missing? That's the A, and that's accountability. The R is resistance. But this is where it's interesting. This is, where do I feel the resistance in me? Where am I feeling resistance? This is where that work that you've done on yourself is going to come in really handy. One of the hacks around resistance for leaders is just this simple question: how old do I feel right now? Do I feel like I'm a 5-year-old throwing sand in somebody's face? Do I feel like a 14-year-old who's cussing out his dad because he's mad? Do I feel like an 18-year-old who just stormed out of the house? Do I feel like a 21-year-old who's really, really mad at his mom because she had an opinion that wasn't worthwhile and I'm 21 damn years old? How old do I feel? Because that is where that resistance comes from. Those unhealed things that are underneath come from some age where that same feeling occurred. That's that work that you're doing on yourself so you can identify the resistance within yourself. So now I've got connection, I've got accountability to myself, I'm identifying the resistance with myself, and now we're getting to the gain, which is the gain to the recipient. And the thing that I think about with gain is this: if you want people to invest in themselves, you have to spend in their currency so they see the gain to themselves. This is where leaders have to know their people. Shawn, like, this is where those little water cooler conversations come in handy. It's not just small talk, right? Like, Michelle, this is where you realize I'm having a hard day. Okay, I'm in it. I'm just going to be human in the moment. I'm going to go over to that cubicle and say, hey, I remember that your son played baseball. How's he doing? Or I remember you're going through a hard time with your husband. Is everything okay? Right? But those moments where you have those conversations, leaders will take those into account and with intention, put that into the value of currency that you can use in those challenging moments, because the gain has to be to them. And then finally, the O stands for outlook. And I want you to notice, outlook is not outcome. A decision is all about the outcome. But what if the decision could be framed around changing the outlook in that moment to realize maybe there's an outcome that we haven't thought of yet? That takes a different outlook. And that, in its essence, is what empathy is. Empathy is perspective taking. Empathy is being able to see from somebody else's perspective. Empathy is all those things. But look at all the work that we did with intention before we got to the gain of the other person and shifting the outlook. You have to take care of you before you can take care of others, just so that we can move away from the binary thinking of yes, no, black, white, up, down, left, right. Because the decisions that we think we have to make, how many times has there been an outcome that we haven't thought of, and we just needed somebody to create the space for us to see that third, fourth, 12th possibility in the solution?
I was just about to say that. It's like, it's all creating this space and seeing all of the perspectives is giving you more insight and information to help you make better decisions. It's not, and I think as a leader, sometimes we think that it's all on me. My job's to make the decisions and it all falls on me, and I need to get the information that I can and make the best decision that I think is possible. But actually, if you think about that decision load and take on more perspectives and open that space, it's likely that you're going to be able to make better decisions and you're going to have more confidence in your decisions. I think this is a connect, right? Because I think it's sometimes you think you've got all these decisions to make and you're like, I've just got to make these decisions, and then you're closing off, your empathy and the empathy from your team. But actually, if you open everything up, it's going to result in better decisions.
Yeah, I think Joe, that's a great point, Michelle. I think from my side, it's how do we, and I think I know the answer you're going to give me is how do we make sure that the cargo thing, what you just described, which I love, by the way, how do we make sure that that's what we default to when we ourselves are in stress or whatnot? I understand we need to take care of ourselves, but like in reality, quite often as leaders, there's just so much going on in life and in work and whatnot. How do we practice what you just said, basically? So just like a sport, we do drills, so we default to that dribbling and all of that when we're not even thinking, it's just unconscious. What you just described, can we practice it enough that it just becomes second nature?
Yes, yes, yes. And here's how I can prove it. When you call an ambulance to come for an emergency, they don't send first reactors. What do they send? First responders. The difference between a reactor and a responder is that a responder has practiced the skill with intention, so that even though the adrenaline is rushing, even though they're experiencing the same things, what their default go-to is the skills that they have practiced. And when we call them skills, I'm talking about the brain patterns that have been established to override the emotional adrenaline rush in that situation. So what leaders have to do for this to become is not just think about it. Like if you listen to this podcast and you go, man, Joseph, we'd love to have you come and speak to our people for an hour. That's great. I could inspire your organization for an hour. And I love doing that. Don't get me wrong. Like my most fulfilling moments are when people go, I've never thought of empathy like that. But the next best question is how? How do we do that? You have to practice skills like this in no stress situations. What I'm telling you is it's a little awkward. We have to invite the elephant into the room. His name is awkward. He's right over my shoulder, right? You got to invite him in, and you just have to practice these scenarios where leaders, every organization has a leadership team. So what it might be is you bring your organizational leadership team together, and then we're sitting around a circle, and Shawn comes to Joseph and goes, man, I was dealing with Michelle. She was giving it to me today. Like, I had no idea what I needed to do. I tried the cargo thing, but this is what I tried. This is, okay, so you play Michelle? Yeah, you know Michelle really well. You do what Michelle did to me, and I'm going to show you guys what I did. And now we've got this level of vulnerable leaders who are willing to lean into this skill together. When I work with organizations, I learned this from one of my mentors, Larry Thompson. When we practice a skill like this, if we have 5 elements, right? Connect, accountability, resistance, gain, and outlook. If I was to do a workshop with you, we would sit in groups of 7. And I'd have somebody who role played as the leader, somebody who was the disgruntled employee or who was having a hard time, and then I'd have 5 coaches. I'd have a connection coach, I'd have an accountability coach, I'd have a resistance coach, I'd have a gain coach, and I'd have an outlook coach. And they would all hold up their signs that have that word on there. And the 2 would role play. And then when the connecting coach saw something that looked like connection or felt like connection, they would put their sign down. And when the person who was the accountability coach recognized the value that person had shared with us before, they're looking for compassion. They're looking for courage. When they see that, they put it down. And when they start recognizing the resistance within, they put that sign down. And when they hear the leader speak in the gain, in the currency of the recipient, they put that sign down. And when they see the recipient's outlook has shifted, whether it's by their body language, that person puts their sign down. And the most valuable piece in that exercise is not even the role playing. The role playing, it's vulnerable, it's powerful, but then it's conversation inducing at the end. Where now people who have had experiences with that employee might say, hey, that gain wasn't bad, but did you know this about that person? Or they're going through this. Or when you did your connection, it felt a little bit forced. What if we just shifted our body language a little bit? What if we softened our tone just a tad? But now we've got leaders who are willing to step in it together. And rather than having a group of leaders who are all in their own little silos trying to get their things done, now we're working on all creating space for ourselves, for each other, and ultimately for the employees in the organization.
That's awesome. I mean, for me, that really took it to a level that it's like learning a golf swing sort of idea, right? Like,
yes,
it's someone standing and all the steps you need to take, and it is just practice with leadership.
It is, and I'll tell you this too, Shawn. If I'm working in an organization, I love to work with a small group of leaders first. We're going to coach you up, and we're going to do a trickle down effect to start, because the mid-manager leaders, they're not the people who are decision makers enough yet, because if they start getting really good at it and they start getting better at it than the people who are above them, guess who feels threatened? They do. So if you can start from the top down and those middle managers start wondering, hey, Michelle used to be really hard on us, but something feels different. Like, she used to be really stressed out all the time, but now not only is she taking the time to ask about my kid, when things are tough, she's actually leaning in and she's asking questions that make sense. What's going on? And when they start to feel that, that's when we reveal the curtain. Like, hey, listen, we've been working on this. Are you struggling with the people that you're leading? We'd like to share that with you. And now what you've done is shift the climate of your leadership to slowly turn the Titanic degree by degree. And ultimately, if this is practiced within 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, now you're really starting to see the culture of an organization take its shift and move in a different direction.
And you know what? I'm thinking about the cues. So the cues that people give you that maybe something's a little off, someone's been late, they're not themselves, maybe they've lost weight, maybe they look really tired, maybe they're a bit more emotional, maybe they're snapping. You can see that there's a lot of work on, so there's stress, there's a backlog. They maybe, are just not. There are all of these different cues that set off your maybe empathy radar, that think, okay, we need to kind of investigate this. Decision fatigue is a relatively new condition, and people don't always know the signs. Like, they don't know the signs in themselves. And this is why we're here, and this is what our podcast is all about, trying to help people recognize this condition in themselves, and also kind of recognize that they still have a lot of power in their decisions. But it's very hard to recognize in other people. But actually, this is a very important tool in your empathy toolbook. It's a cue that you need to start reading, because you can be physically not tired. So mental fatigue is that tiredness, and decision fatigue is different. And so, you could be looking at somebody who looks refreshed, who is well caffeinated, well rested, they look healthy, they look like everything's really good, but yet they're struggling, and they're struggling with their work, they're struggling to make decisions. And actually, like, it's not always readable from the outside, but what they can be suffering from is decision fatigue. And I think as a leader, being able to kind of recognize that and think, okay, this is where they do either need some time out, or they need some coaching, or we need to be able to help them, or we need to find that solution. And I think this is so new, right?
That's super insightful, Michelle, too, actually, because we've done a lot of work with decision fatigue, and one cohort that we particularly were interested in was video gamers, actually. So high-level video gamers. And what was interesting about them is they see the consequences of their decision instantly, right? It's kind of like in athletics. If you make a poor decision, you're instantly aware that you made a bad decision, right? And they get very emotional from bad decision making when they suffer from decision fatigue. So they have decision fatigue, but then it's very much tied to an emotional state of frustration, because they know that they're not making the best quality decisions. And they see the repercussions of it right away. So yeah, I think, Michelle, that's a great insight, because then as leaders we can say, hey, you know what's causing this emotional state? Well, one of the answers could actually be that you're forcing too many decisions on your employee.
And it's also, you could identify it with we spoke earlier about the decision avoidance and the default decision making, is that if you are starting to see patterns with your team, that they are avoiding making decisions, they are waiting for you to make the decisions, even if you are empowering them to make the decisions, but they're avoiding them, or they're defaulting to the safest option, which, might not be what the business needs in order to grow. Again, it's rather than necessarily thinking, okay, maybe they're being lazy, or maybe, you kind of automatically thinking, okay, where's the problem? The problem could be decision fatigue. And being able to spot that in your team with this skill of empathy can be really powerful.
So I have a hack that I want to share with you and with your leaders that can put leaders instantly into an empathetic as a skill mindset. Here it is. One, it falls under the value that I hold for myself, which is curiosity. If a leader can remain curious, you have a chance. And I'm not even going to say a fighting chance. You are putting yourself in the sphere of creating space, because you're wondering, what else could it be? So that's the sphere that we're in. But then, like, how do, leaders are going to be like, well, how do I get curious? Like, I'm really annoyed. How do I get curious? What does curiosity look like? Okay, so here's the hack. Move away from why questions about the other person and move towards what and how questions. So let's put an example in. Michelle steps into the office and she's got this sullen face on. She just is not herself. And a leader first thinks, why is she looking like that? Or even, why is she looking like that? And then that leader might feel like he's being courageous and step in and go, Michelle, why are you looking that way? Well, now Michelle has been given a decision. How do I answer this question? And it feels really personal Do I get vulnerable? Do I not? Do I get vulnerable? Do I get not? When you can move away from the why about them to the what or how, firstly about myself. There's Michelle. She's got a sullen face. How am I going to approach this? What can I do to make sure that Michelle still feels comfortable so that she can get her job done today? What are the things that I'm going to do? What is it that I'm going to talk about? How am I going to approach this situation? And then I walk into Michelle. Hey, I was just wondering, how's the work coming? I noticed that things weren't quite the same. What can we do to support you? Did you see the difference there? We moved away from making it personal. Why is problem solving inducing? What and how is curiosity creating? So when leaders can and all you're doing by asking the what and how questions is you're just simply creating space to figure out what the next question is going to be. Leadership hack 101 with empathy.
That's great. I'm going to try it on my wife later today. Yeah, we'll see if that diffuses the...
Poor wife is like the guinea pig for everything.
I would be remiss if I told her that I didn't try. And here's the thing is, Shawn, when I use that with my wife, it's actually less for her than it is, and more for me. It's so that I don't get into the why do you think that way? And Shawn, I know we're not talking marriage, we're not talking relationships, but it applies it does apply in organizations. The people who it is the hardest to create space for is the people who we are most emotionally attached to. Mm-hmm. Because the people who we experience relationship with, and relationship is just defined as an emotional connection. The people who we experience relationship with are the people who have the greatest potential to hurt us because they're the people who are the closest to us.
Well, no, I mean, honestly, Joseph, the organization and to leaders, this is fantastic, but I think it's applicable to any human interaction. Right?
I'm going to be using it on my kids.
That's what I was thinking too, right? Like it's something that is just so human, and really all you're trying to do is just enable this connection that sometimes office and professional environment hinder, right? And you're trying to bring us back to a state that's probably more natural and more kind of tribal in a sense.
I was at an event the other night, Shawn, and somebody asked me, like, what are you selling? Like they knew that I was a keynote speaker, and they knew that I brought in, and they're like, what's the empathy guy? Like, what are you selling? And it took a moment, and in the moment of inspiration, I said, I'm selling human connection. Because we've lost it. We've lost the capacity to connect in a way that's not transactional. So much of human connection feels like it's outcome driven, which is why sales feels icky. The bottom line feels icky. Your KPIs feel gross. Your numbers don't match. Because it's so driven. And then when we tie the human connections to that, you start to get manipulative. You start to get resentful. You start to get weight on you. Leaders start to feel pressure, and then that trickles down. But if we can just sell human connection for just that, the space to make a decision on your own that makes sense to you, that's going to value the company at a greater value. It sounds so simple, but simple doesn't mean easy.
One last question to just wrap up is, and I think it kind of leads on from what you were just saying, is, what's the ripple effect of practicing empathetic leadership?
I'm going to rephrase that for you, Michelle. What is the ripple effect of practicing empathy with intention? Because if I just say empathetic leadership, it feels really grounded in my empathic nature, right? But when I say, what's the ripple effect of empathy with intention? Now we're talking business speak. Now we're talking organizational lingo, because everything in an organization is done with intention. So when we can bring empathy with intention into our leadership circles, into our leadership pods, into our leadership training. We've touched on it. It starts with the few. And when the few start to make a shift in the climate, people touch those leaders and they feel different. Your words can be really misinterpreted no matter what your heart comes from, right? Your actions can be taken totally out of context. But people are never going to forget the way that you made them feel. And when you make them feel empowered, when you make them feel like their autonomy matters, and you give them the opportunity for mastery moments throughout the day that matter to them, your space creation is actually a conduit for purpose. Wouldn't you want to be the organization that fundamentally fosters purpose in every single one of your employees? So that even when they leave your organization because they have to move, they come to you and say, this was the most incredible place. I'm going to take the things that I've had here and I'm a better person because I was here. And it's not just I'm a better person because you were my leader. It's you were just an impetus in shifting the culture. And so the culture of the entire organization is creating space with intention, right? The skill that leaders have to create space for one individual so that individual can see the value of change for themselves. And that spreads.
I also believe that the organization as a whole, the collective, will start making better decisions, especially if they feel that they have got a voice and they're being heard and they can have real impact. I think, as a result of being able to really truly hear what people are saying, you're going to make better decisions. And I think then as a ripple effect down, I think collectively the whole organization would start making better decisions, and growth is only going to come out of that.
Yeah, I think Joseph, one segment that, and maybe you do already, sorry if I'm mistaken, but like you need to talk to entrepreneurs. Like this because on any startup is built on its people, right? And the most important commodity for a startup is the few people that started, right? And everything that you just described is if that's part of culture day one, right? That's how you scale with a startup, because you're going to attract the best people in the world. Because usually the best talent, that they join you because, well, they're good at what they do, but also they're looking for an environment that's inspirational, that you're a team, you're a tribe. So if you're not doing it already, I think because I'll tell you right now, it's one thing that is not taught enough in the startup world. It's one thing that venture capitalists aren't looking at enough is this type of leadership, because this is the staying power of the people, right? This is what you just described as an organization that people would leave a higher paying job to join, right? Not to put a dollar value to it, but like if you're not doing it, you should. Like this needs to be such a part of the startup world.
And that's exactly what's happened to me. Like I've literally left like a corporate job, and I was like, I don't want to go back into that environment anymore. And now I've got this huge honor of being able to work with Shawn on something that's so meaningful and that's going to have real impact. But it's the team, it's the small, there's 3 of us right now, and we're in this incredible kind of startup environment, but we're also very clear on the type of company that we want to build. And me and Aaron, the CEO, have conversations about this, every few days. And, I think exactly like Shawn said, having a little bit of advice from the empathy guy right at the beginning is just going to set the tone for hopefully, some epic growth.
And not that I don't care about the big organizations, but like the startups need this. Like they really, really do. Because it's such a powerful concept and idea and foundations for a company, for sure.
Listen, what if your code of ethics as a startup was founded with empathy, with intention as the foundational value of your company, and we practiced taking that value off the wall by engaging in it as a skill from the very beginning.
Huge. And again, this is what venture capitalists and investors should be asking, because their question is, how are you going to attract talent? And what you just described is in my opinion, one of the most important factors, right? If you can build that from day one, you're going to be different and people are going to want to work for you.
There's never going to be, I will tell you this. Do you know what empathy's biggest enemy is?
Tell
the
us.
bottom line. The bottom line. Remember, the O stands for outlook, not outcome. So if I have a venture capitalist who is interested in the outcome, I'm sorry, we're not a good fit. But if I have a venture capitalist, if I have somebody, listen, whether it's venture capitalist, whether it is, there are some people who it is very difficult to work with because they're so driven by the outcome. That's just their default. And until they see the pain enough for them to want to change, remember, for themselves, they have to be able to choose that. If Joseph just comes in and says, well, this is the best way for you to get the bottom line taken care of, then we've just transactionalized empathy and we've just made it feel a little bit icky.
Oh God, man, Joseph, look, I feel like we could do a part 2 and a part 3 and a part 4 because, this conversation just keeps getting more interesting the more it goes on. And that's saying something. Thank you so much just for sharing your knowledge and your platform and the work that you're doing. Because I love that this is not insight that you are just selling, that you're so open about kind of your cargo method and everything else, that just being able to, you're so generous in terms of sharing it. And I think that's just awesome. So really, thank you so much for coming on. And you've given us so much food for thought.
Thank you. I'll tell you, Michelle, one of my greatest joys in doing this is after getting off of a stage, people will come to me and they'll say things like, I never thought about it that way. And to me, that is the purpose of why I'm here. Is I'm not here to sell human connection. I'm here to just be a facilitator of human connection. And if we can just change the small bits that we can and influence the people who need to see this and hear this, we've done everything that we can.
I mean, the world needs more people telling us to be honest. I think this human connection thing is just something that's missing. And I would say you're just reminding us what it is to be human, which is so important. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And like I said, I think the startup world in particular needs someone like you everywhere. I think that's the we need to start this from the ground up for new organizations and a new generation of leaders. I know we talk about reteaching leaders, but I mean, I would love to see this for young leaders in colleges. Like, this should be something that is just ingrained in teaching and leadership at large. So that's my wish.
We are going to link to all of Joseph's channels below. Please check everything out, connect with him, ask a bunch of questions as well. So let us know what you think of the episode. Any comments we will answer. We'll get Joseph to answer. And if you like this episode, please subscribe. It really helps. And we've got some amazing episodes coming up. So keep checking us out.
And Michelle, I'm going to jump in and say this. I want to include for your listeners a PDF of the cargo model just for your listeners. I'm going to send it to you, Michelle. And if you listen to it and it resonated and it's something that hits with you, I'll send Michelle over the PDF. It's got my information on there. That's not the important part. Start to implement cargo to the best of your capacity. And when it's hard, because it will be, reach out and let's connect.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We'll definitely link to that below. And to remember to everyone, make every decision count. Thanks. Bye.